You know, I never thought I'd be telling a story like this. But here I am. The name's Ethan, and boy, do I have a tale for you. It all started on a hot summer night in Nashville. I'm talking the kind of heat that makes your clothes stick to you like a second skin. I was standing outside this popular dance club called Tootsie's, feeling completely out of place. The neon signs were flashing, country music was blaring, and drunk people were stumbling all over the sidewalk. I took a deep breath and pushed my way inside. The smell hit me first. A mix of beer, sweat, and perfume. The dance floor was packed, bodies moving to some twangy song about trucks and heartbreak. And that's when I saw her. My wife, Melissa. Now you've got to understand something. Melissa and I, we grew up in pretty strict homes. Church every Sunday, no drinking, definitely no dancing. But there she was, grinding up against some cowboy wannabe, like she was auditioning for a music video. I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I just stood there, watching as the stranger's hands roamed all over my wife's body. Finally, I snapped out of it. I pushed through the crowd, bumping into people left and right. I didn't care. I had to get to Melissa. "Melissa!" I shouted over the music. She didn't hear me. Or maybe she was ignoring me. Either way, I kept going. When I reached them, I grabbed Melissa's arm. "Melissa!" She spun around, almost falling over. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused. She reeked of whiskey. "Ethan," she slurred, squinting at me. "What are you doing here?" The cowboy looked between us, realization dawning on his face. "This your husband?" he asked Melissa. I ignored him, focusing on my wife. "We're leaving. Now." Melissa pouted like a little kid, "But I'm having fun." I said, "Now, Melissa." Maybe it was my turn, or maybe she saw something in my eyes, but she didn't argue. She stumbled as I led her out of the club, the cool night air a shock after the stuffy interior. As we walked to the car, Melissa kept tripping over her own feet. I had to practically carry her. "You're no fun," she mumbled. "Never any fun." I didn't respond. I was too busy trying not to lose my temper. When we got to the car, I helped her into the passenger seat. That's when I noticed the stain on the back of her dress. I felt sick as I realized what it probably was. The drive home was quiet, except for Melissa's occasional hiccup or mumbled apology. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. When we got home, Melissa made a beeline for the bathroom. I heard her throwing up, then the toilet flushing. I sat on the edge of our bed, my head in my hands. Melissa came out of the bathroom looking like a mess. Her makeup was smeared, her hair tangled. She collapsed onto the bed next to me. "I'm sorry, Ethan," she mumbled. "Didn't mean for you to see that." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "So you're not sorry for doing it, just sorry you got caught." She didn't answer. She was already passed out. I spent that night on the couch, tossing and turning. By morning, I knew things had to change. Melissa didn't get up until afternoon. When she finally stumbled into the kitchen, I was waiting with a cup of coffee. "We need to talk," I said, pushing the mug towards her. She winced at the sound of my voice, then took a sip of coffee. "About what?" "About last night. About what's been going on for months now." Melissa sighed, running a hand through her tangled hair. "Ethan, it was just dancing. You're making a big deal out of nothing." I slammed my hand on the table, making her jump. "Don't lie to me, Melissa. I saw you. I saw everything." She looked ashamed for a moment, then her face hardened. "So what if you did? You can't control me, Ethan. I'm not one of your church mice." Her words stung. "Is that what you think this is about? Control. Melissa, I'm your husband. I love you. I just want to understand what's happening to us." She laughed, and it wasn't a nice sound. "What's happening is I'm finally living, Ethan. I'm tired of being the perfect little wife. I want more." "More than our marriage?" I asked quietly. Melissa didn't answer. She just grabbed her purse and headed for the door. "I'm going to stay with my parents for a while," she said, not looking back. I need some space to figure things out. And just like that, she was gone. The next few weeks were rough. Melissa stayed with her parents in Nashville, only coming home to grab more clothes where she knew I'd be at work. We barely talked, except for short texts about bills and stuff. I threw myself into work, spending long hours at the real estate office. But no matter how busy I kept myself, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. It was during one of Melissa's quick visits home that I found it. I was doing laundry, something I'd started doing since she left, when I noticed a pair of panties stuffed behind the hamper. They weren't Melissa's usual style. These were tiny, lacy, and stained. My hands were shaking as I picked them up. This was proof of what I'd been afraid of. Melissa wasn't just dancing with other men. She was sleeping with them too. I sat on the bathroom floor for a long time, holding those panties. When I finally pulled myself together, I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to a private investigator named Jack Donovan. The second was to a divorce lawyer, Sarah Prentice. I met Jack at a little diner on the edge of town. He was an older guy, looked like he'd seen it all. "So, you want me to follow your wife?" Jack asked, raising his bushy eyebrows. I nodded. "I need proof. Real evidence of what she's doing." Jack leaned back in the booth, looking at me hard. "You sure about this, kid? Once you start down this road, there's no going back." I met his eyes. "I'm sure. I need to know the truth, no matter how bad it is." He nodded, like he approved. "All right then. I'll need her schedule, places she usually goes, that kind of thing. And just so you know, I'm not cheap." I slid an envelope across the table. "This is just to start. Get me what I need, and there's more where that came from." While Jack got to work, I met with Sarah to talk about my options. She was tough as nails, known for taking cheating spouses to the cleaners. "Based on what you've told me, Ethan, we have a strong case for at-fault divorce because of adultery," Sarah said, tapping her pen against her notepad. "If we can prove Melissa's cheating, you'll keep all your stuff and won't have to pay her anything." I nodded, feeling both relieved and sad. What if she fights it? Sarah smiled, and it wasn't friendly. Let her try. With the evidence your PI is getting, she won't have a chance. For the next few weeks, I was on edge all the time. Every time my phone rang, I jumped, thinking it might be Jack with news. Melissa came home even less, and when she did show up, she was cold and distant. It was almost a month later when Jack finally called. "I've got what you need, kid," he said, sounding grim. "But you're not gonna like it." We met at the same diner. This time, Jack had a big envelope with him. "You sure you want to see this?" he asked, his hand on the envelope. I took a deep breath. "I'm sure." Jack slid the envelope across the table. Inside were dozens of photos. Each one felt like a knife in my heart. Melissa going to sleazy motels with different men. Melissa drunk and messy, coming out of clubs. Melissa kissing a woman in an alley. But the last photo was the worst. Melissa clearly enjoying herself on top of a guy in the backseat of our car. The car I'd bought her for our anniversary. "There's more," Jack said quietly. He showed me bank statements with big cash withdrawals, credit card bills for hotels and lingerie. And then he handed me a small plastic bag with white powder in it. "Cocaine," he explained. "She's not just cheating, kid. She's using drugs too." I thought I was going to be sick. This wasn't just cheating. This was Melissa completely falling apart. "What do I do now?" I asked, barely able to speak. Jack's eyes softened a bit. "You take care of yourself, kid. And you let that tough lawyer of yours do her job." I nodded, gathering up all the evidence with shaking hands. As I stood to leave, Jack called out, "Hey, Ethan." I turned back. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. You seem like a good guy. You deserve better than this." I couldn't speak. I just nodded and left. I drove straight to Sarah's office with all the evidence. She looked through it all, her eyes getting wider and wider. "This is a lot," she said. sounding impressed. Your PI did a great job. I nodded, feeling numb. So what now? She leaned back in her chair, looking like a cat that caught a canary. Now we go for the throat. With all this, we can file for divorce because of adultery and drug use. Melissa won't know what hit her. Sarah was right. Melissa was completely blindsided when I served her with divorce papers. She showed up at the house, my house now, screaming and yelling. "You're divorcing me," she screeched, waving the papers in my face. For what? I stood my ground, all the anger and hurt I'd been holding back finally coming out. For sleeping your way through Nashville and doing enough cocaine to kill a horse. She went pale. "You don't have any proof of that." Without a word, I handed her copies of some of the Tamer photos. She looked through them, her hands shaking. "You had someone follow me," she whispered, sounding angry and ashamed. "I didn't have to." I shot back. "You weren't exactly subtle, Melissa. Did you think I wouldn't find out? That I'd just keep playing the fool while you destroyed everything we had?" She started crying. "Ethan, I can explain." "Save it," I cut her off. "I don't want to hear your excuses. I want you out of my house and out of my life." She tried to argue, to beg, but I was done listening. I'd spent months wondering what I'd done wrong, blaming myself for not being enough. But now I saw Melissa for what she really was, a selfish woman who'd thrown away her life together for a few cheap thrills. As I watched her pack her things, crying and cursing me in equal measure, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. This wasn't the ending I'd wanted for us, but it was the ending we needed. The divorce was quick and brutal. Sarah used all the evidence to show that Melissa was unfaithful and unstable. In the end, I kept the house, my savings, and even got the car back, though I couldn't bring myself to drive it anymore. Melissa left with nothing but her clothes and a bad reputation in our town. Last I heard, she'd moved back to Nashville for good, trying to run away from her shame. I'd like to say that was the end of it, that I moved on and found happiness. But life isn't that simple, and neither is getting over betrayal. In the months that followed, I threw myself into work. I became the top agent of my firm. I fixed up the house, getting rid of everything that reminded me of Melissa. I even started going to therapy, trying to deal with all the emotional baggage she'd left behind. But just when I thought I was finally moving forward, Melissa's name started coming up again, and not in a good way. It started with a late-night call from a number I didn't know. When I answered, I was surprised to hear Jack Donovan's gruff voice. "Ethan, it's Jack. Look, I know this ain't my business anymore, but I thought you should know. Your ex-wife, she's in trouble." My heart started racing. Even after everything, a part of me still cared what happened to Melissa. What kind of trouble? Jack sighed heavily. "The serious kind. She's been arrested twice in the last month. Once for prostitution, once for trying to sell drugs." I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. "Prostitution? You mean?" "Yeah, kid. Looks like she's working as a hooker. And not the expensive kind, if you know what I mean." I had to sit down, my head spinning. How had Melissa fallen so far? The drugs I'd known about, but this. "There's more," Jack continued, sounding grim. "Word on the street is she's gotten mixed up with some bad people. Drug dealers, the kind you don't want to owe money to." I closed my eyes, feeling a mix of pity and disgust. "Why are you telling me this, Jack?" There was a long pause before he answered. "Because despite everything, I could tell you loved her once. And well, I've seen how these things can end. It ain't pretty." After I hung up, I sat in the dark for hours, drinking whiskey and wondering how things had gotten so messed up. Part of me wanted to reach out to Melissa, to try and help her. But another part, the part that remembered all the pain and betrayal, held me back. In the end, I did nothing. I told myself it wasn't my problem anymore, that Melissa had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. But the guilt ate at me, always there in the back of my mind. Life went on. I dated a bit, but nothing serious. It was hard to trust again, to open myself up to the possibility of getting hurt like that again. But slowly, surely, I started to heal. And then, almost a year to the day after our divorce was final, I saw her again. I was leaving a house I'd just shown, feeling good about a potential sale, when I spotted her across the street. She was arguing with a guy, her hair a mess, her clothes cheap and dirty. As I watched, frozen in place, the guy grabbed her arm. Melissa tried to pull away, but he was too strong. Before I knew what I was doing, I was crossing the street. "Hey!" I shouted. "Let her go." The guy looked up, surprised. Melissa's eyes widened when she saw me. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The guy sneered at me. "This ain't none of your business, man. Walk away." I stepped closer, my heart pounding. I said, "Let her go." Maybe it was something in my voice, or maybe the guy just decided it wasn't worth the trouble. Either way, he shoved Melissa away and took off down the street. For a moment, Melissa and I just stared at each other. She looked awful, skinny, pale, with dark circles under her eyes. Nothing like the woman I'd married. "Are you okay?" I finally asked. She nodded, rubbing her arm where the guy had grabbed her. "What are you doing here, Ethan?" "I work around here," I said. "What are you doing here, Alyssa?" She looked away, shame written all over her face. "You know what I'm doing." I did know, and it made me sick. "Come on," I said, gesturing to my car. "Let me buy you a cup of coffee." She hesitated, then nodded. We ended up at a little diner not far from where I'd met with Jack all those months ago. Melissa ordered coffee and a burger, her hands shaking slightly as she picked up her mug. "When's the last time you ate?" I asked. She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "I don't know. A while, I guess." We sat in awkward silence as she wolfed down the burger. I couldn't help but notice how thin her wrists were, how her collarbone jutted out sharply under her threadbare t-shirt. "Melissa," I started, then paused, not sure what to say. "What happened?" She laughed bitterly. "What happened? You know what happened, Ethan. You made it happen." I felt a flash of anger. "I made it happen. I didn't make you cheat on me. I didn't make you start doing drugs." "No," she said quietly, "but you didn't try to understand either. You just threw me away." I stared at her, incredulous. "Threw you away? Melissa, you destroyed our marriage. You lied to me, cheated on me, did God knows what else. What was I supposed to do?" She looked down at her empty plate. "I don't know. I felt so trapped, Ethan. Like I was suffocating in that perfect little life we had. I didn't know what I wanted." I shook my head. "So you decided to blow it all up? To hurt me like that?" "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered. I couldn't stop. Once I started, it was like I was free for the first time. But then it all spiraled out of control, and I couldn't find my way back. I sat back, running a hand through my hair. "And now, are you still?" She nodded, shame coloring her cheeks. I tried to stop. I really did. But the drugs, and then I owed money, and you started selling yourself. I finished for her. She flinched at my words but didn't deny it. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything that had happened between us hanging heavy in the air. Finally, I spoke. "Melissa, you need help." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think I don't know that? But who's going to help me, Ethan? You? After everything I did to you?" I didn't know how to answer that. Part of me wanted to walk away, to leave her to the mess she'd made of her life. But another part, the part that remembered the girl I'd fallen in love with, couldn't just abandon her. "There are programs," I said slowly. "Rehab centers. Places that could help you get clean, get back on your feet." She looked at me, hope and suspicion warring in her eyes. "Those places cost money, Ethan. Money I don't have." I took a deep breath, knowing I was probably making a huge mistake. "I'll pay for it." Her eyes widened. "What? Ethan, no. You can't, after everything. I'm not doing it for you, I said, maybe a little more harshly than I intended. I'm doing it because I can't stand the thought of you ending up dead in Somali, because despite everything, I did love you once, and because it's the right thing to do. Tears welled up in her eyes. I didn't deserve your help. No, I agreed. You don't, but I'm offering it anyway. Take it or leave it, Melissa. It's your choice. She stared at me for a long moment, then slowly nodded. Okay, she whispered. Okay. And just like that, I found myself pulled back into Melissa's orbit. I spent the next few days researching rehab facilities, making phone calls, arranging everything. Melissa stayed at a cheap motel, calling me every few hours, sometimes crying, sometimes angry, always scared. The morning I was supposed to drive her to the rehab center, I got to the motel to find her room empty. My heart sank. I should have known she'd run. But then I heard the toilet flush, and Melissa came out of the bathroom, looking pale but determined. I'm ready, she said, her voice shaky. The drive to the rehab center was quiet. Melissa stared out the window, hugging herself tightly. I kept my eyes on the road, trying not to think about how familiar this all felt, how easy it would be to fall back into old patterns. When we got there, Melissa hesitated before getting out of the car. Ethan, she said, turning to me. I know I have no right to ask this, but will you? Will you visit me while I'm here? I gripped the steering wheel tightly. I don't think that's a good idea, Melissa. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I understand. Thank you for everything. I watched her walk into the center, feeling a mix of emotions I couldn't even begin to sort out. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of my story with Melissa. For better or worse, our lives were still entangled. The next few months were a roller coaster. Melissa would call from rehab, sometimes sounding hopeful, sometimes despairing. I kept my distance, but I couldn't help caring about her progress. Then one day, I got a call from an unknown number. Hello? Ethan, it's me. I did it. I'm out. I'm clean. I felt a surge of something. Pride, relief. I wasn't sure. That's great, Melissa. I'm happy for you. There was a pause. I was wondering, could we meet? Just to talk. I have some things I need to say to you. I hesitated. Was this a good idea? But in the end, curiosity won out. Okay, I said. Where? We met at a park, neutral ground. Melissa looked different. Healthier, yes, but also older somehow. More serious. You look good, I said as I sat down next to her on a bench. She gave me a small smile. Thanks, I feel better. Clearer. We sat in silence for a moment, watching kids play on the swings. Ethan, Melissa finally said, I owe you an apology. The big one. What I did to you, there's no excuse for it. I was selfish and stupid, and I'm so sorry. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she continued, about why I did what I did. And I realized I was running from myself, from my fears, from everything. But I'm done running now. I looked at her. What does that mean? She took a deep breath. It means I'm taking responsibility for my actions. It means I'm going to work on myself, figure out who I really am without all the crap I used to hide behind. I nodded again. That's good, Melissa. I'm glad. She turned to face me fully. I know I have no right to ask this, but do you think we could try to be friends? Not now, not soon, but someday. I felt a pang in my chest. I don't know, Melissa. That's a lot to ask. She nodded, looking down. I know. I miss you. Not as my husband, but as my friend. You were always my best friend, Ethan. I stood up, needing some distance. I can't promise anything, Melissa. But maybe, someday. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. That's more than I deserve. Thank you, Ethan, for everything. As I walked away, I felt lighter somehow, like a chapter had finally closed. I didn't know what the future held for me or for Melissa, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. The next few years were a period of growth and change for both of us. I threw myself into my work, rising through the ranks at the real estate firm. I even started my own company, specializing in renovating and flipping houses. Melissa, true to her word, focused on her recovery and personal growth. She went back to school, got a degree in social work. We kept in touch sporadically, careful, polite conversations that slowly became more relaxed over time. It was about 3 years after Melissa got out of rehab when I ran into her at a local coffee shop. She was with a guy, laughing at something he said. When she saw me, her smile faltered for a moment, then brightened. "Ethan," she called out, "come meet Tom." I hesitated, then walked over. Tom was a nice-looking guy, friendly smile, firm handshake. "So you're the famous Ethan," he said. "Melissa's told me a lot about you." I raised an eyebrow at Melissa. "All bad, I hope," I joked. She shook her head, her expression serious. "No, Ethan, all good." We chatted for a few minutes. Tom was a teacher, it turned out. He and Melissa had met at a recovery meeting. They'd been dating for 6 months. As I walked away, I felt a mix of emotions. A twinge of jealousy, yes, mostly relief. Melissa looked happy, healthy. She'd found someone who understood her struggles, who could support her in a way I never could. That night, I sat on my porch, nursing a beer and thinking about the strange turns life can take. 5 years ago, I'd been a broken man, betrayed and angry. Now I was successful, content, and Melissa, who I'd once thought was lost forever, had found her way back to herself. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from Melissa. "Thank you," it read, "for everything. I wouldn't be where I am today without you." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "You're welcome," I wrote back. "I'm proud of you, Melissa." And I was. Despite everything we'd been through, despite the pain and the betrayal, I was proud of her. She'd faced her demons and come out stronger. As for me, I was ready to turn the page to start a new chapter. The story of Ethan and Melissa was over, but our individual stories, they were still being written. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where mine would go next.